It's episode 91 of the Author Stories podcast. I'm your host, Hank Garner. This week's episode is brought to you by Audible.com. You can get a free 30-day trial with a free audiobook download at audibletrial.com/Hank. Go and sign up today. Pick from thousands upon thousands of audiobooks to play on your iPhone, Android, PC, iPod. Any device that you listen to stuff on, you can listen to audiobooks. This week is also brought to you by the Author Stories Insider. Go to hankgarner.com and click on the Insider link at the top, and you can get access to all of the archives of the show and have access to a special secret bulletin board where we talk about upcoming shows, and you know ahead of time who those special guests are and get to submit questions that I will ask for them. Lots of other new features will be coming to the Insider soon, and it's available to you for only $9.99 for an entire year. You pay once, you get access to all the archives, all the special features, and you also get access to shows 2 days before everybody else does. So go to hankgarner.com, click on the Insider, and join up. Thanks for listening. Now on to my interview with Terry R. Hill. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, my very special guest is Terry R. Hill, author of Third Exodus and New Dawn. I get asked all the time by people, what criteria do I use when I pick guests for the Author Stories podcast? And sometimes I answer those, sometimes I don't. But the honest answer is I only have one criteria when I pick guests, and that is that I have to be a fan of this writer and of their work. And Terry R. Hill, I recently got copies of Third Exodus and New Dawn. Thank you, Terry, for sending those to me. And I went to my post office box, saw them in there, and went to pick up one of my daughters from school, and I was sitting in the parking lot, and I started thumbing through Third Exodus, and I completely fell down the rabbit hole. So thank you for that, Terry. And I think that afternoon, or it may have been the next day, I can't remember, but I emailed Terry and I said, Terry, you've got to come on the show. So here he is. Welcome to the show, Terry.
Thank you, Hank. It's my pleasure.
Yeah. So, Terry, you've listened to the show. You know how I start these out. What is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or a storyteller?
That's a good question. It's one of those things that I'm not sure there was a distinct moment in time. I've always enjoyed writing. Remember back in freshman college, I think it was, I had some writing assignment for introductory English, I believe it was, and the teacher called me up to her desk and she said, Mr. Hill, you clearly have a lot to tell the world. Now we just got to rein you in. So
oh, that's great.
That was Mrs. Jane Bowders. I actually was able to look her up and find her about 6 months ago and reestablish contact with her because she made such a profound impression upon me and really kind of instilled the joy of writing. And, you know, as we may talk later, there was a large gap in time from that time to when I actually decided to sit down and start writing Third Exodus, which is my first novel. But at the time, beginning Third Exodus, it was one of those moments in my life that, instead of a midlife crisis, I call it my midlife reevaluation, where I decided that I needed to do something creative and could have something that was proof of my own effort and that I could hold in my own hands. And I decided to put my love of writing and with my creative side, which I've been in kind of denial of some time, and out popped a couple of novels.
Midlife reevaluation. I'd like that. I think I'm going to use that. I will give you proper credit, though, when I do.
Awesome.
Yeah. As a kid, were you a big reader?
I wasn't until I would say about junior high.
Okay.
And then I was introduced to the Xanth series by Piers Anthony.
Okay.
And then later I got introduced to Joel Rosenberg's Guardians of the Flame. Both of those are fantasy series. And I would just sit and just consume the books just one after another. I'm not a fast reader, but, I like to take my time and get fully immersed in the book. So, I would just really just sit and just digest those books every time I got an opportunity to get one.
What was it about those fantasy books that piqued your interest? Can you put your finger on any one thing or handful of things?
Well, I think, and this is on-the-spot speculation, but I grew up in East Texas, in kind of the country, to a fairly religious Methodist family. You know, we're pretty straight-laced. And I think the fantasy realm was so far removed from my reality of the time that it was phenomenally engrossing and just very new and exciting and just and yet still in a positive way, you know.
Kind of pushed your boundaries a little bit.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I had a similar experience to that. I can I'm sure some listeners out there can relate as well, but I think I know exactly what you're saying. Were you a science fiction fan as well as fantasy, or was fantasy more your wheelhouse?
Fantasy in the early years, and then later with science fiction. You know, Piers Anthony wrote one book. What was it called? I forget what it was called, Dark Star or something. And then they had some pseudo science fiction, the Adept series. It wasn't until college that the real pivotal moment where I kind of turned the corner to science fiction was when a friend of mine handed me a copy of Heinlein's Strange in a Strange Land, and that right there was just, I was like, oh my goodness, this is just an entirely new and different world I wasn't even really familiar with, and really kind of tickled my philosophical bent that really kind of intrigued me, and as you say, got me sucked down the rabbit hole of, you know, thinking bigger things and greater thoughts.
Heinlein has corrupted many an innocent young man's mind, for sure. Oh, so you're a fan of fantasy. You begin to love science fiction. Heinlein turns you on. You are a classically trained scientist. How did that come about? And tell us a little bit about your career pursuit.
Right. Technically, I'm an engineer. I went to college. I've always enjoyed airplanes and wanted to be a pilot. And, you know, my room as a teenager was full of model airplanes painted and hanging around the ceiling, and which might explain why I didn't get very many dates. But so coming into college, my goal was to be a pilot, commercial pilot. But I decided to get a aerospace engineering bachelor as a backup plan in case being a pilot was just too boring for me. Somewhere along the line, I got sucked into space and exploration and human exploration, and decided that was what I was going to pursue, and actually never ever took one single piloting class. And
wow!
As it was time for me to graduate, the market for aerospace engineers was horrible. The only job that they could get was in the computer programming time, and that was before the dot-com bust. So I went back and got my master's in aerospace engineering and guidance, navigation, control theory, specializing in neural networks. And then that somehow led me into getting a door open for me at NASA, which was not part of the plan, but just kind of a dream come true. I didn't even think that was in the realm of possibilities, and somehow I just stumbled into it and have been there for almost 18 years now.
Wow. What can you say what department you work in?
Currently, I work in I'm the deputy manager of the Crew Health and Safety Program, which is the program that provides health care for the astronauts for the time that we're part of the process of doing medical and psychological screening of the candidates. We take care of them and get them ready for flight. Our psychologists take care of them and their families during flight when they're up in space. And then we help rehabilitate them when they come back. And we actually track them on a volunteer basis for the rest of their life, just to see if we can see any long-term effects to having been exposed to spaceflight. That's what I'm doing now, and I currently have just accepted a rotation over to another department where we will be managing this medical data and setting up a new construct to help take us well into the 21st century in terms of new big data, informatics, and metrics and such.
I'm sitting here just trying to wrap my brain around what that must be like for a science fiction and fantasy fan to get to walk in the doors each day of this place that so many of our fantasies and science fiction dreams have taken place at. How has your day-to-day job affected how you see the creative process and the kind of the realm of story creation for you?
That's a good question, because what I've noticed is, when you think of engineers, you don't think of highly creative people, really.
Right.
But actually they are.
I was about to say I would disagree with that initial statement, because in doing these 90-something interviews, a common thread is that there is a very close correlation between people that are nerds, geeks, and I'll use those terms lovingly and affectionately, and creative people. We get a bad rap, but continue with your statement. I'm sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I've noticed is that, there's a large number of them are in bands or are artists, or there are a few of us that are writers. So that was kind of an interesting revelation for me. But in terms of the creative process, I think what spending almost 2 decades as a project and program manager / engineer, part of that is mitigating risk, right? Because, as they say, failure is not an option, right? So you have to get good at reading the tea leaves and seeing the future, and coming up with all types of scripts in your head that could lead to logical conclusions to either what would happen or how you could avert it. And I think all of that really kind of helped me quite a bit in terms of being able to see a logical progression into the future. And, inevitably, a lot of what I write is kind of, I guess, classified as hard science fiction, because, they say write what you know, and I know this. And so what I've tried to do is taken my job experience in terms of trying to see into the future based upon current trends, infusing the reality of spaceflight as best as possible through my experience of supporting human spaceflight and being on the shuttles or on the ground. I haven't flown in space, but being able to crawl inside the shuttles and what have you. Try to infuse all the realities of operations of spaceflight and the real environment and the effects of the human into my book, to try and add as much realism as I can in terms of science fiction, hard science fiction, which kind of sounds funny because it's kind of synonymous. But I think I kind of have a bit of a unique experience to be able to do that. So I think all of that has lended me to be able to provide a more, at least to myself, a more realistic manifestation of science fiction, if you will.
This is kind of the inverse of a question that I ask a lot of science fiction writers. Usually the question is, how do you research and do your due diligence to make sure that you are representing science truthfully, effectively, and merging some fiction in our science fiction, but keeping it as true as possible. Now, the opposite is what I'm going to ask you. How do you keep your fiction fresh when you're immersed in the science constantly?
Well, that's a good question, because you can, another trade handicap of being an engineer is, everyththing you write is technical, right? It's not remotely interesting in terms of entertainment. It's very by the fact, by the books. So you're absolutely right. It's difficult to sometimes make sure that you keep the entertainment value in there, not get bogged down in the fact checking and keeping things as realistic as possible. So I think really I have to go back through, and once I write it, read it from an outside person's perspective, try and use a fresh set of eyes. And as I go through it, if there's been a page with no dialogue, or something sounds like it's incredibly boring because it's too realistic, then I go back and try and spice it up. And that's what I tell people is, like, if I were to write hard science fiction in line with current reality of human spaceflight, as you heard, there's, hours and hours of boredom punctuated by moments of terror. So, you don't want a realistic mission to Mars, because you'd have a 2,000-page book where they're just doing the same thing day in, day out, which is completely boring. So, at some point in time, you have to depart from reality and inject, just as a plot mechanism, some science fiction technology, unobtainium or what have you, just to kind of get the plot moving along and keep the reader's interest.
Yeah. So tell me, we'll come back to NASA in just a little bit, but tell me about this this midlife reassessment. At what point did you realize that you had something creative in you that you needed to get out, and kind of unravel that process for us a little bit about how that happened?
Yeah, I guess anybody who's been through a reevaluation like that will be able to identify a little bit with what I'm talking about. And you reach a point in your life where you say, okay, so this is where I am. Okay, not what I expected. So, as part of that, and it's a process. It's not something that happens on Monday and you're done by Friday, right? It's a gradual process where you kind of reassess your life and what you've done and how that lines up with, where you wanted to be or what you now find to be interesting. And, one of the conclusions that my wife and I kind of came to independently, but at pretty much the same time, was we needed to go through and assess our daily life and activities and say, what of these things brings awesome into my life? And
like
what
that.
of these things increases the suck in my life? And so we came up with the conclusion that, our goal was to increase the awesome and decrease the suck in our daily lives. And, to be a bit rude, but I mean, it's, you kind of walk around and unconsciously pick up suck in your daily life, and it's just things that you think you should do, but you really don't have to. It's obligations, it's movement, it's, habits, things that you think you should be doing. It's the right thing to do, but don't actually bring you any awesome into your life. It doesn't bring you any joy. And we find ourselves just bogged down, and it was a real challenge to say, okay, what really brings awesome to life? What really makes me want to jump out of bed in the morning? And I was coming up zeros. I mean, as strange as that is to sound, having worked at NASA, but, the shuttle program had shut down, the Constellation program had shut down, and there wasn't a whole lot of new stuff in the pipeline. So, a lot of things had kind of evaporated on me, and I was kind of having to reevaluate things at work. But to make a long story somewhat shorter, I was driving home after a particularly frustrating day at work, and I said to myself, I was like, what happens, what if NASA doesn't get the job done? What if we don't figure out how to live in space economically and safely? What if Russia can't figure it out? What if ESA? What if Chinese, for goodness sake, what if they can't figure it out? How ironic would that be? And then I got to thinking, I was like, okay, just for grins, what's the least likely country or countries that could get the job done? How funny would that be? And I thought, who would that be? Well, Africa. Now, I'm not being disparaging, but they're not known for their space program, right? So
Right.
So I thought, okay, well, what would have to happen for that scenario to play out? Again, seeing in the future based upon current data, and just kind of playing through that in my mind, and as I was driving home, and kind of came up with some neat ideas, and I thought, okay, well, that's interesting. So I just kind of filed that in the back of my mind, and the next day wasn't particularly as fulfilling either. So on the way home, I start thinking about it again, and after a day or two, I was like, I might actually have something here. And then I got to thinking about, well, I do enjoy to write, and people over the years have told me, in different emails or whatever I sent out, they say, you did a really good job on that. You really should think about writing sometime. So I thought, okay, well, I'll give it a shot. And then I just sat down and started writing.
Had you ever? I know you said you had that college teacher that encouraged you, but had you ever, seriously thought about writing a piece of long form fiction before that?
No, I hadn't. The best I had done up until that point was some some brooding poetry when I was a distraught 20-something-year-old.
Oh, yeah. Thank God. Thank God we were in our 20s before the internet, right?
Yeah, all that's undiscovered and will stay in my past, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So that was about the limit of it. And, when I first contemplated writing a novel, this series, this trilogy, currently a trilogy, started out as just as a concept for a single book. And, as I started outlining it to flesh out the ideas and get everything in there that I wanted in there, it was clear to me that I had more than one book, probably two. And then as I was fleshing out the last part of it, I said, well, I definitely have 3 books worth of material here. So that I started the process of writing it right then, and it just kind of evolved over time.
Did you go home and share this idea with your wife?
I did, and I talked over the years with her, saying, I kind of like to write a book sometime, and she said, well, about what? I said, well, I don't know, maybe some more philosophical thoughts that are kind of merged with theology and what have you, all the things that we kind of ponder. But I just wanted to kind of, I guess, more or less an exercise of writing it. But over the years, I'd said I wanted to write a book, and so I said, well, I think I'm going to write a book, and she was like, okay, what about? I said, well, science fiction that involves Africa, and she kind of gave me the cross look as if I hadn't been speaking English up until that point. She's like, well, okay, all right.
Was she pulling the paper out and saying, I'm not sure if this fits in awesome or suck, but...
Well, she knew where I was at. She was like, okay, well, it's cheaper than a sports car, so we'll let it go.
Yes, it is. So how did you begin? Like you had never written a piece of long form fiction. Did you just sit down at the computer and chapter 1 and just go at it, or did you start trying to discover characters? Kind of where I know you had this kernel of an idea, this what if scenario, where a lot of our books begin. I think that's always a great exercise to take things that we're familiar with and start injecting some vagary into it, and then asking what if questions. But kind of how did yours start unpacking and evolving?
Well, I'll have to say, anybody who's listening that's classically trained writer or has gone through 10,000 hours of how to write your first novel training, just close your ears now, because I'm just going to insult everything that you've done. I sat down and I did make kind of a character list of who I thought would need to go and be part of this storyline, and of the critical people that would need to be part of it to facilitate the evolution of the plot and everything. And did kind of, in hindsight, is a very sketchy character trait type of treatment of the characters, and they kind of evolved over time. Given I really hadn't spent a lot of time thinking about it prior to started writing, and part of my engineer training came out in me, and I sat down, and I guess by nature I'm an outliner. A lot of people are outliners, and some people are pantsies. They just kind of write for the seat of their pants.
Yeah.
And so what I would do is I'd do the outline, just a few bullet points, and then expand upon 2 or 3 bullets per each bullet, and then a couple bullets per those bullets, and then a sentence or 2 to flesh out each one of those, and the next thing you know, you got a 10,000 word outline. And what I'd use those as writing prompts for each scene. So I basically would boil it down to scene level, and then use those writing prompts to write out the scene. And that worked really well for me because, I didn't really ever get set back with writer's block, because I had an outline, so I knew pretty much how it was going to go. So if I wasn't feeling inspired by a particular scene, then I would jump to some other place in the book and start writing that I was inspired by. And that can be haphazard, and things kind of change later in the book. You got to go back and make changes in the front part of the book to make it flow right. But I didn't really see that wasn't a real problem for me. But after I finished the first draft and gave it to a friend of mine to read, he said, "So, were you going for a screenplay?" I said, "No, it reads that way." And I went back and read it. I thought, "Oh, geez, you're right." So, at that point in time, I started going back and doing research on writing technique and style and understanding the difference between all different point of views, and really kind of settled upon what I found I really liked to write in is third person, deep point of view, because that's kind of gets you down in the head of the character without it becoming first person. Because I think first person is really tricky to pull off well.
Right.
And I wasn't there yet in my skills, so that's kind of why I settled with how I did.
That's an awesome piece of advice, whether you meant for it to be or not, for new writers. I think your discovery method of the way that you got the story out, and yeah, your viewpoints weren't what you wanted them to be, and you didn't have the skills necessary at the time, but you got the story out.
Right.
And then I'm assuming through a process of pretty deep editing, you took that skeleton that you had and you started putting muscle on it and then putting skin on it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it went from 80,000 words in my first draft, 82,000 words first draft, to 102,000 on the second draft.
That's great. That's great. I think a lot of writers approach that novel and they assume that at the end of the first draft that this thing needs to be ready, to hit publish on or to start sending to agents or, however, whatever process you pursue. But the most important part of that entire process is getting the story out. However you do it, getting from the beginning of the story to the end of the story. And then you can go through and you can fix all the window dressing. So I like that you shared that part of your process. I think a lot of people need to hear that.
And I think I've got to give due credit to my friends and old friends and new friends who I met during the process of beta reading. Because the first book, a couple of them had to read through it a couple of times as it matured, right? And they really gave me some super valuable advice, and what I would pass along to anybody else who's going through this for the first time or even the second time is don't, if you have a intimate relationship with any of your potential readers, be it a wife, girlfriend, boyfriend, mistress, what have you, don't use those as beta readers, because they're not going to give you honest feedback. You need somebody that's really going to tell you that your feet stink and that your dog is ugly, and make sure that they can provide you constructive feedback no matter how uncomfortable it might be, because that's really where you're going to learn how you're going to improve. One of my beta readers, I usually save her for last because, each beta read has her strength, and, she's pretty brutal. She works up at MIT. She's very well-educated, and I tease her because I said, I don't mind the truth, but just don't deliver it with a mace. She's no holds barred, but it's the books have been better having had her read them, so I give her credit.
That's great. So you had the idea for the story that you started playing What If. You've got a tale of the future and of space exploration with a cast of characters that are unexpected. For a lot of, like you said, the setup, the least likely, the least likely scenario is what you picked. So how did you? What characters came to you first, and how did you start brainstorming through the story after you got that initial idea?
Yeah. To kind of set the story for those, it make more sense if I kind of set the story. The premise of the book was that in a future not dissimilar from our current future, where cyber terrorism is on the rise, we had a government agency that was actively producing an artificial intelligence that could monitor internet activity for cyber terrorism or terrorism at all, and proactively detect it, search it out, and have the ability to take down remote infrastructure to disable any of that activity. So it had to be able to, it had to be robust, it had to learn, it had to be able to act upon on its own, and be able to detect threats not only to itself but to the United States and what have you. Now, at the same time, in Africa, there was a terrorist group that was actively working and growing headway, across the globe, and they kidnapped a rather up-and-coming programmer who would kind of do some shady things on the side to help line his pockets, but he was a family man and generally was a nice guy. Anyway, they kidnapped him and put him to work because they had seen some of the shady jobs and been watching him over the network, and they knew he had the skills, so they had him develop a worm, if you will, that would go and infiltrate the major nodes across the internet and basically inject code into these servers and repeaters and what have you that would basically mask any of their activity. So it kind of makes their activity on the internet invisible. So, as what most things that, work with the space program, I appreciate, when things go real bad, it's not one thing, it's a stack up of many things that happen, unfortunately, at the same time.
Right.
Well, this is what happened here, is, USAI meets terrorism worm, and they, follow their programming and try and take down the other, and through the process, merge into something larger, more, synergetic and, larger than individual components. And that kind of somewhat becomes self-aware and moves out onto the internet. And the U.S. researchers realize what has happened and try and go and shut it down, and it immediately sees that as a threat to its existence. Because it has become rudimentarily aware of itself, and therefore it went to preservation mode, and things escalated quickly. And as you can replay Terminator in your mind. Well, that's kind of what happened. And but through happenstance, the worm didn't work properly and kind of made Africa invisible, so that when the new larger entity kind of came into existence, it couldn't see the continent, but sure bombed the hell out of the rest of the world to try and eliminate the threat that was being waged against it. And that's how Africa was left, relatively unscathed in a torched world. And that's chapter 1. So I violated all the rules of writing. I killed off all the characters in chapter 1. So chapter 2 is about 150 years later. And, the continent's standing back on its feet. It's kind of getting back to where it was 100 years ago. They realize that the world's run out of resources, and they've got to find someplace else to live or to get resources. So they stand up their space program and kind of go through Apollo 2.0. But in a world that has been largely destroyed with limited resources, you're not going to have a cast of thousands applying to be astronauts and be qualified. So the characters had to be special in as much that the colonel, the leader of the mission, was, he's kind of like John Glenn. He was on the ground, boots on the ground from day one, but he stayed with the program, and now in his 40s, what have you, he's a military guy that's been through a lot of bad business, in addition to being a very tried and true astronaut. So he was leading the mission, and the characters that went with him were some of the ones who he brought with him from the military, and then some of the brightest minds and engineers that the world had to offer at the time. And that was kind of the plunky group that went off exploring.
The science, I'm sure, came easy to you, or at least you had pretty readily at your fingertips lots of resources and research points. How much work was it for you to familiarize yourself with the characters and with these geographic locations, maybe geopolitical setups, things like that. How much of the human intel did you have to do?
No, that was good. Good question, because you're absolutely dead on. There's the human part that really was the toughest, because I had to, reliable and accurate information that comes out of Africa is not an easy thing to find.
Right.
There's the major news feeds kind of feed you what is either politically advantageous or what might sell something, not necessarily the day in, day out stuff. So really finding a reliable source of information of the geopolitics or what's really kind of happening and what life is really like in Africa was very difficult. And then also challenging was trying to figure out how close to the line of ethnically accurate do I need to get before it becomes too much and I isolate most of the readers. Because if I really kind of go hardcore and then really kind of dive into the culture and go native, then, the average reader, it wouldn't make a lot of sense to them, right? And they wouldn't really get sucked into it. So there's a very fine line between where you give enough detail so you get a flavor of the underlying cultural aspect, but you try and keep it at the human level such that anyone can relate to it. And also I tried to do is try and keep it realistic by picking out real names of live people that live in different countries in the African continent, and tried to pick out ones that were representative of the people and the countries that the character comes from, but still be familiar enough that you won't stumble over every name. Now I didn't succeed because people tell me, I was like, how do you pronounce his name? I was like, well, just use your best effort on it.
Oh, that's great. So was there, as you started, after you got that first draft done, you got some feedback, you started doing a little research on the craft of writing and understanding viewpoint and taking that skeleton and dressing it up like we talked about. Then as you started giving it to other people to read, what was some of the feedback like that you started getting, and at what point did you realize, I think I've got something good here, and at what point did you really get excited about it?
Yeah, that was very, very distinctive. I do remember that. I gave it to a couple of people after it had been through a beta reader or two, and I had kind of rewritten it and fleshed it out and fixed, kind of evolved and developed the characters more to address all the feedback that I've gotten up until that point. And I would give it to a couple of people, and one of the first things I heard from them was, "Man, this is a serious page turner. I couldn't put it down." And one guy read it in like 3 days, and another lady, she read it and she said, I love this character. It's a female character. She said, Tarde. And she said, I just love this character. And I just really like the fact that she's a strong female character. And, I like the way you treated this, and blah, blah, blah. And it was really getting a lot of positive feedback. And it wasn't lip service. You can really kind of, after you've been done this a while, you can really kind of smell the lip service from the actual true feedback. Okay. And at that point in time, I realized, okay, I think I might have something here.
So then how did you go about publishing that first book? So you've gone through all the processes of writing, revising, getting feedback. I'm assuming you probably made some minor adjustments with feedback from readers. Mm-hmm. How did you take that to finished published product?
Right. So from day one, I knew I was going to self-publish.
Okay. Stop right there. What was it from day one that you knew that you were going to self-publish?
Right. And, I'll go back to the early conversations I had with my wife and I. I tried my best to writing on as a non-interference basis as I could with my family, because I've got two small young children and an older son who's in college. So, you can't just drop everything, all your daddy duties, and just go write. So, right. And also, this was something new and different, and I didn't want it to add weirdness to the family because now Daddy's often in a room all by himself on the weekends writing. Don't disturb him. So I didn't want that to happen. So, part of the deal was I would do this on non-interference basis, but I also had to figure out as quickly as possible if I had something, if I had a skill, or if I had a marketable thing that I could produce. But if it takes 4 months to write the book and then 6 to 9 months to get it beta read and tweaked and edited professionally and then get a cover, you're talking a year to 14 months from start to finish to produce a book that's ready to be sent off to a publisher.
Yeah.
And then, there's 6 months to 2 years to find yourself an agent, and then they submit your book to publisher that may take another year or two to get back with you or to sell it. So now you're looking at a 3 to 5 year process for your first book to know whether or not you had something marketable.
Yeah.
And for someone in my position, I couldn't I couldn't impact my family for 5 years on the hope I might have something, because that's too much time. It's too much investment to know if I've wasted my time or not. So from the very beginning, I'm like, okay, good, bad, or ugly, I'm going to self-publish this thing and try and get some feedback. And if it turns out that I have a skill that people that like and are willing to pay money for, then I'll keep writing books, and through the process, some will get sent to publishers and hopefully picked up.
And so you finished and you self-published. How did you begin to build a readership?
Well, I think there's always the word of mouth by friends and family, right?
Right.
Because getting started.
Is that where you go to family gatherings and you threaten everyone that they better buy your book? Because that works for me. I was just wondering if that worked for everybody else.
Well, a lot of my family is still in Arkansas, and the fact that I'm writing science fiction is, it's not exactly what culturally is real prominent there, but I'm fortunate to have a large circle of friends that I've been able to maintain over the years, and I've been able to reconnect with on the internet. So, that was a really kind of a first start at trying to get word by mouth spread around. And of course, you're trying to you try and use Facebook to the best possible that you can to do your advertising. And
try to leverage it.
Yes, good word. But as you well know, there's fits and starts with how productive that is, and it's a learning process. I'm not a salesman by nature, so that doesn't come to me naturally. But it's a fine line between, trying to advertise yourself and pimping yourself to the chagrin of your friends and family.
Right. So you said in the beginning that when you first started outlining this, you realized that this was 3 books, probably. You finished the third Exodus. First off, before we go any further, the name of the series is In the Days of Humans.
Yes.
And the first book's title is Third Exodus. Yes. Tell me about that title. Where did the title come from?
Yeah, it's funny because I picked that title out, and it had meaning to me, but also, in hindsight now, having spoken with a lot of people, I realize that it has a double meaning to it. A lot of people say they read the title and they think, oh, so it's a religious book, huh? I'm like, well, no, it's not. The whole premise was that I was kind of playing off of the history of mankind, such that, through our anthropology, we know there's been 2 major waves of migrations of people, humanoids, out of Africa over our, last 120,000 years. That has kind of repopulated the earth a few different times and kind of spread genetic code, but it's always come from Africa. So the idea being, with the story, how poorly things went, and once again, from Africa was where humanity would rise from once again. And so this is the third Exodus from Africa, if you will.
Gotcha.
And
go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, in the series title, In the Days of Humans, it's one of those things that really won't make sense until you finish book 3.
Okay.
And what you'll find is, through the eyes of some of the lead characters, you see the evolution of humanity. And this is kind of a retrospective look at that. Because, taking, the principles of life, such that you largely are a creation, a product of your DNA, but also largely a product of your life experiences. And if you go into a new environment, be it you or be a moth on an evolutionary standpoint, over time in a new environment, that organism will change. And if mankind leaves Earth and lives someplace else, at some point in time, they're going to fundamentally change in some form or fashion that you really kind of have to characterize them as something different.
Well, and it gets to the heart of one of those great arguments or great story devices in a lot of great fiction, is where we explore nature versus nurture.
Right.
And are we who we are because that's who we are, or are we a product of our surroundings and the things that happen to us? This is a great setup that you've devised to really explore some of those human questions and to kind of wrestle with some of those puzzles.
And I took it a step further, just from the evolutionary standpoint. I took it a step further into, how does that impact our philosophy and our theology, which, they're tightly coupled. And how much of that is, navel gazing of humans, and how much of it is just integral core to who we are as a human, Is religion something real, or is it something that made us evolutionarily successful? So my books, I explain to people, I wrote my books such that they're kind of like an onion. There are lots of layers. On the surface, they're fun, exciting, adventure books, page turners, what have you. But if you want to, you can peel the onion layer by layer, get deeper and deeper, and still find something to chew on.
And I'm sure through the process of writing these books, you have definitively answered all those questions.
Of course.
Right. So I told you earlier that I was going to get back to NASA. When you started releasing books, did you share these with any of your colleagues?
I did.
What was the response like?
They were actually kind of surprised. They're like, "Wow, you can write. You're not just some guy that sweats over my budget." You wrote something halfway intelligent. But
oh, that's great.
I had at the time, I was fortunate to work with the group I'm in now, so I was able to make sure that I got all the medical stuff right, and the human response to different environmental conditions. Also working with the psychologists and psychiatrists of NASA, I was able to play off scenarios as friends, just talk to them as friends and play off scenarios in my plot to make sure that, the human reaction was real and accurate based upon their experience. Because in book 2, book 1 it's kind of an Indiana Jones man against the clock type of situation, and man against the world. In book 2, it's a different beast, and I take a darker look at it, at humanity, in as much that I wanted to explore really the lines of the shadows and where they fall. And as we all know, it's easier to be a Monday morning quarterback, right? 2020 than high, 2020 being crystal clear and all that. But the reality is, in tough situations, you make the best decision based upon the options that are presented to you. And sometimes all of the options might be shades of horrible.
Yeah.
And dealing with that, and your inner turmoil of having to not only make the decision at the moment, but also live with your decision after the fact, and what that would look like. And I just wanted to explore that, just not only just a writing exercise, but also philosophical as well, and to kind of see how that would turn out. But I'm not saying that the book is all dark, because I kind of say, all my stuff is postmodern with hope. I don't leave you bummed out.
Postmodern with hope. Right. That's not something you get very often. Right. So you're 2 books into the series. At what part of the process are you on the 3rd book?
It's with beta readers right now.
Is it really? Yep. Okay. So Is there an ETA for publication?
Well, anybody
Is there
who's
a
had
hope?
beta readers know that it's I'm going to be done in 2 weeks or 6 months.
Right, right.
It's whenever I can get the feedback back from the readership, and the cover artist is finished with his masterpiece, and the editor is finished inserting all the commas that it will be done. But my hope is midsummer.
Okay, okay. Do you have a tentative title yet that you could share, or are you holding that under wraps?
No, the working title is Evolutions.
Evolutions with an S.
With an S.
Excellent.
Yes, we see it's multiple evolutions.
Did so with the third book complete? Are you satisfied that the series is complete, or do these characters have more to give?
That's a good question. I set up the book series that there's a 20-year gap between book 2 and book 3.
Okay.
So, if the readership demands it, or if I just get obsessed with a new storyline, I have room to put novels in between books 2 and 3. So, there's always room to expand the series. And also, because it takes 20 years after the second book, I was able to bring in the mechanism that allowed me to bring in the next generation of people who were born on Mars.
Okay.
And so it gives me a new cast of characters. They are all 20-somethings, so that opens up the young adult market for me if I choose to. But it also gives me a next generation. It's kind of like the difference between Star Trek and Star Trek Next Generation, right? It's a new generation, new technologies, new problems. So it's really kind of set the stage to go in multiple directions if I choose to.
I love it. Terry, where can people find you to follow your work and to get plugged in with this series and to keep up with what's going on with you?
Okay, I have my website that is terryrhill.net. I also have a Facebook page. You can search for T.R.Hill, or it's on Facebook, or just look for T.R. Hill author and you'll be able to pop up. I'm also on Twitter. Trying to remember what my Twitter handle is, but we can put it up on the website. I can't remember.
Yeah, I'll plug it in the show notes for sure. Terry, any closing remarks that you'd like to share with the audience, or any encouragement that you would like to give to people that maybe are like you and find themselves at a reevaluation point in their life and realize that maybe they have something creative that they want to offer?
Yeah, I think if anybody who's ever been creative or think they might be creative will appreciate this. I can't tell you how satisfying it is on a core personal level to have people take your work and give you honest feedback and tell you that they really enjoyed what you created. I just, with all my years at NASA, I can't tell you that anything has been more personally satisfying to hear those words. And it's only an artist really understands that when someone says that about their painting, and an author can, after putting the blood, sweat, and tears in it, can only really understand what that means after they've done it. But if you think you're remotely creative or have a story to tell, go and make friends with people that have done it. And if we have time, the analogy I give you is, if you want to be a billionaire, you don't take financial advice from your brother-in-law who sleeps on your couch, right? You go seek advice from the billionaires, find out how they did it. And same with writing. If you want to write some genre, find somebody in that genre that you respect and you enjoy their work, and who will actually reply to your emails and just start a conversation and just learn from them.
That's great advice. Terry R. Hill, I'm a fan.
Thank you.
And I'm right at the end of Third Exodus, and since you have given me a piece of encouraging news that Book 3 is coming down the pipe, I'm going to go ahead and dig into Book 2.
Awesome.
I I like to leave myself a little something to look forward to. So I was hesitant about moving book 2 up in the to be read pile, but I'm going to have to go ahead and dig in. Thanks so much for taking time to come on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Also, you'll be able to find more of my works this year published in the Future Chronicles. That's available on Amazon.
Which book are you in?
I'm in the Doomsday. That should come out, I think, in the next month. So I've got a Doomsday story that will kind of leave you awake at night. And then I've got one that is submitted, and it's part of the Halfway Home series by Hugh Howey. Is that right?
Yeah.
So it's an anthology of short stories based upon the world that he created in his book Halfway Home.
I love it. I didn't know that you were a Future Chronicles alum. So
I'm slated to be part of the Mars Chronicles at the end of the year when it comes out.
Nice. Yep. Excellent. I look forward to all of it. And thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you. I've thoroughly enjoyed myself, Hank. I appreciate it.